Hi everyone, I am Margarita Estrada, Chief Operating Officer of Voyage Consulting and Business Solutions. I'm with my colleagues, Arlene Blanco, our CEO and founder, and Mario Lewis, our CFO. Grow your business with Voyage. Ignite your career with Voyage. Start your voyage today.
Yes. For value-added content, please follow us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Start Your Voyage, and follow us on LinkedIn. If you remember last week, our foundation for our discussion was Darlene's first article, Leading Winning Teams, Part 1. To see the text, visit our LinkedIn page. To see the video, visit our YouTube channel, again, at Start Your Voyage. See, for tonight, we're going to do a continuation. Uh, we have seen the Leading Winning Teams Part 2 by Darlene again. Hope you had the chance to read it in advance. Again, please go to our LinkedIn page or visit our YouTube channel to see it. But I want to hand it over to the author, the publisher, the writer, Ms. Darlene Blanco, to kind of give us an overview, a snapshot to help launch our discussion tonight. Over to you, Darlene.
Thank you. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Margarita. It is a pleasure to be here tonight to talk about leading winning teams, part two. I was really inspired to write a piece about the essence of what it is to create winning teams and just how embedded in the involvement as a leader it is. There's just so much to unpack when you're thinking about bringing a team together and all the different ways that they'll overcome obstacles, how innovation will happen, how you will, intersect with new ideas and bring in some innovation into your teams through some of the new ways of working. So there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration, and there's just so many different things that an organization can do, a small team, a large team, and you can do well when everyone's working in sync. So I started to think about some of the things that go wrong on teams. So why are teams not winning? And I started to think about, well, maybe there's lack of commitment, there's lack of engagement, or maybe quite frankly, the teams just don't want to be involved in doing anything other than checking in and checking out and checking their boxes and doing their 9 to 5. So when I started thinking about why those things were happening, it made me look at what leadership can do to help motivate and create winning teams, because it's a difference in what your outcomes will look like and how much capacity you can build and grow, how much revenue stream will be impacted. And when you look at people around you and all of you are winning, you can really celebrate success. So, in considering some of the research components, I wanted to dig a little deeper and look across all the different industries to say, well, what's working out there? What's not working? And let's talk about it.
Wow. There's a lot to unpack there, Darlene. Thank you. Hey, do you mind if I jump in, Margarita?
Go right ahead.
One of the first things I noticed about Darlene's article, she starts right up front talking about team engagement, team commitment, and the impact that communication has on that. Uh, I think that was a great way to start because without an engaged, motivated, encouraged team, you don't really have a team to begin with. So I think one of the things you identify some of the traits that are important and disciplines that are needed for teams. How do you link those specific disciplines in creating team engagement?
I think by leading by example, and I know that that's something we hear over and over again, but how many people are actually living it, breathing it, doing it, and checking in with yourself? Because I think that's where it all starts. And in order for me to think about how I'm going to inspire the teams that I'm going to build and grow, I had to think about, well, how am I inspiring myself every day to motivate what could be something stale, right? Because people get a little kind of like, oh, this is mundane, this is day to day, we're doing, here we are again, like, how do I make this work impactful? How do I add a piece that I can bring everyone together and really create something? And when I'm thinking about that, that's the piece where the light bulb goes off, because instead of going out and saying I need to figure out how to engage a team, I have to think about, well, how do I engage myself first? Because I'm the first part of that motivation. If I don't believe in it and I'm not driven, no one's going to follow along with me. So that is kind of part one of what that looks like for me.
So I guess I'll jump in here. Okay, so one of the areas that I highlighted in your article reads like this: the most common way for organizations to increase engagement is through a compensation or promotion-based model. So that works well if the company is doing well. However, if the company is losing revenue, how then do you increase motivation when you're not able to give them compensation or perhaps a promotion? So, Mario, how do you do this?
Absolutely. I think compensation and merit-based compensation is not the only way you reward employees. I think it starts by creating an environment where people want to be. Uh, when Darlene talked about, like, you have to lead by example. I mean, my focus is always creating a special place where people feel that they can bring themselves to work, and bring as much of themselves as possible. So you're creating an environment for success. And even when in a downturn, I mean, companies will go through challenges. Not every company is always on a upward trajectory. It is in those times where, as I think what Darlene speaks about, is strong communication skills, letting people know this is where we are, but this is not where we're going to stay. This is what, and point to where you're going to go. So give them direction, give them a mission, give them a purpose, because even in a downturn or a challenging environment, you can still have a vision for the company. You can still point to a direction that leads to a positive outcome for that person. And that begins with strong and consistent and repeated communication. So I think that's the only way. Compensation isn't the only, it's quite a motivator, but it isn't the only motivator. Great question, Margarita. Thank you.
Exactly. So, Darlene, can you expand more on that?
I've been in lots of situations where we've been through budget crises. I've been in the workforce for a really long time. I don't want to age myself, but not every year is a bonus year. That's just how the business goes, and this is how things operate. And, there have been some great years, and then there's some times where you're like, oh, wow, we're not going to be able to really, we have to cut back. We have to cut back. And what does that look like? And when I'm thinking about not being able to compensate an employee or compensate myself, because I'm an entrepreneur and there's lots of times, I'm digging into my own savings, or, thinking about like, oh, I can't take a salary this year. I have to really reflect and say, well, what are we doing in our strategic planning? How are we coming together to talk about this? What is our future going to look like? What are some of the challenges we're facing? It goes back to, identifying, I go back to reading some of like Rita McGrath's, like Seeing Around Corners. I love that book because I think about forward thinking and what are some of the things that we need to start worrying about, so that when that time comes, we already have sort of a plan in place, and bringing my team together to really look at what that looks like. So if we're not doing well enough to have a good comp that year, what are we going to do to change that? And what are we going to do to make up the deficit in terms of like, well, then we have to figure out another action plan. If what we're doing is not working, you just don't go back and keep redoing it. That's just insanity. You just don't go back and you can't like why would we do that again? Like if you bought something and like it's like flavor ice cream you wanted to try and it wasn't good, you're not gonna go buy it again. So should do this with our business planning as well. If we're trying things and not working, we need to understand, well, what are all the parameters, revisit them, engage with the stakeholders involved throughout the other parts of the organization that might be a little bit more siloed and we don't know what's going on under their hood. So bringing everything together to really look at it, and as a team be creative around how we will get paid next year.
Absolutely.
Mario, take it away.
I think one of the other areas where you highlighted, and this was one of the quotes that was at the beginning of your section when you talked about communication. It says there's several traits that are common across teams in multiple disciplines, including communication, effective leadership, adaptability, and well-defined roles. But communication is still the key in forming highly effective teams. I mean, it was great how they identified all these great things you could do, but it seems like communication stands alone as the number one things that are consistent that you have to do. So, Margarita, I want to pose it to you. What,
Well,
why is communication so awkward, and how should it be done? How do we execute it at a high level?
well, I just happen to have the right story for you.
Uh-oh.
This past Tuesday, as I was leaving my job, a young man walks in with his laptop and he says, Miss, could you please, can I borrow your Wi-Fi because my hotspots are not working and I'm about to go into an interview on Zoom. Can I please borrow your Wi-Fi? So I see the desperation in his face and I let him come into the office. I set him up and 30%, no, I would say, yeah, 30% of the interview was based on his skills, his technical skills on Jira. JIRA is a Jira systems, it's a project management system. But the rest of the interview was on communication.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot believe how much of this interview was on communication. How do you form teams? What is your communication with your teams? How do you resolve conflict? These were all the questions that this young man was being asked. And he answered them with such expertise and calmness and peace that they asked him to come for a second interview right there on the spot. So obviously he knew what he was talking about. I felt as if I was living what we are covering. I was living what we are covering. So yeah, so one of the important areas that they told him that was important regarding his future, possibly future job, was adaptability. Being able to conform to different needs and problems as they come along. So I believe that with communication, adaptability is very important. And based on this interview that this young man had, clearly I was on the right path with this one. The sense of adaptability. What if you have a crisis situation? What if suddenly the system crashes and you have to work overtime? Do you get all upset? Or do you say, okay, let's get down to the trenches, roll up our sleeves and get to work? So I believe the adaptability is very important. They also asked him about resolving conflicts. And this one gets a little tricky because let's say you're having a conflict that you feel you cannot resolve. So normally they advise you to go to HR. But HR that normally works for the company and not so much for the employee. So what do you do in that situation, Darlene?
Oh my gosh, I get the tough questions. I just want to start by saying, there's a lot to think about when you're like looking at human resources and what they are set out to do and the business practice that their functionality, if you will. And they have to follow strict guidelines and, employees may not always understand what's happening within those guidelines, all the legal terminology. So they kind of create what they think is their own vision of what might be happening. And I think there's just going back to the point of communication, it goes back to having your staff, your employees, everyone on your team really understand and unpack, well, what are the ethical guidelines here? What are behaviors that are acceptable, not acceptable? How do we behave in the workplace? What are some of the things that will be frowned upon? What is, and it could even be as simple as like, if we're giving out free coffee, don't take it home. Even silly things people don't even think like that could be something that's considered wrong. Like, so when I think about, just how we're responding to how they're understanding what is in that, literature, it's on the onus is on the leaders of the organization to make sure that we have enough time to have trainings so that employees can really understand what their responsibilities are, what are the expectations for them, what are the expectations of the employer, and what are the legal implications, what are their rights if they feel that they are been, in compromise in some way, or if the organization is doing something, and understanding what all all of that looks like. And I think that there's a lot to be said there, because there's a lot of organizations that maybe are not getting that right, because we all learn at different paces. And some folks are having like an online module training course, check a few boxes, but the people sped through the exam really didn't understand what was happening there and what are some of the legal things that should be really talked about and unpacked. So I think that that's important for a leader and for an HR to create that alignment, so that employees don't feel like, oh, well, I can't really go to them because, they're not going to protect me. Because it's not about the HR protecting an employee. It's about the HR saying, we're going to let you know, here are the rules of what business operates like, and here are what, and that's exactly what they do. And it and people will create their own story about what they think is happening.
Yep.
So I've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen it. But that's
To your
not to say
point.
that there are some, unethical practices that happen within those ethical practices. But this is why we're always having, sounding guards, people, whistleblowers, folks that are always, just making sure that if you see something, say something, because we just can't stay quiet about things that we see. That's the one piece of advice. If there's something going on that seems a little funky, like say something and cause, raise a flag.
Yep. To your point, you started out by saying communication is the key, and it goes in all directions. In that section, in addition, in that other section, same section of your article, you spoke about team commitment, and there was one section, I think it was based on some research you'd done at Kellogg School of Management, saying that creating a team contract for members to sign to support member commitment. I found that so intriguing, and I was wondering, how was that? How did your research kind of pan out? How did it tell you about that? Because I hadn't previously really heard about that type of contract.
Me neither.
Yeah, it did come up in my research, and it's interesting because I chose to write about it because during that time, during my free time, I spend a lot of time at my public speaking club, and it's Toastmasters International, and they actually have what's called a Toastmaster Promise. And I was trying to figure out how to re-engage, my club members, and so we recited this promise, and we went around and we all kind of made that commitment of what we were going to do for our speaking club. And I said, wow, this is something I should research and look at. Our organization's doing this. And lo and behold, this is actually a business practice that is super highlighted at all of the most top recognized organizations. They have one in existence. People are signing their employee contracts. It's going along side by side. In most cases, it's incorporated within their evaluations, their performance evaluations, so that it's sort of like a parallel, like a document that shows, as part of your development plan, here's how we're working with you in that sense. So bridging it all together, like what is your commitment to the organization? How are we progressing you forward? Where have we gone? So it's really interesting, because as I'm thinking about that sort of code of ethics of what you're going to be committing to within your team, you're also reflecting back on like how, partner organizations that you work on are doing these things just to keep volunteer members engaged. I said, if you can motivate volunteers, there's
Wow,
something there.
that's a powerful tool. I hadn't thought about it in that way, but it's right. Once you have put, even if it's an informal, but once you feel like you said you recited it, you've done it verbally, it feels like a binding contract, and you make a promise to do something. Wow, I like that idea. I want to find out how we can implement that better in teams that I participate in.
Yes, I was impressed by that idea as well. That's why I highlighted it. I said, what, a contract? But I thought it was good because once you read it aloud and you have it pen to paper, as I say, there's a value to it. It records it in the brain as something that is valuable and important. So Darlene, that is a good one. So thank you for that one. I thought that was really awesome. So I'd like to take a break at this time to remind you that if you're enjoying this content, we'd like to remind you to go to our Facebook page and LinkedIn and follow us, and to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All our platforms use the handle at Start Your Voyage. So let's continue on with training and development. So you write here that high performance teams recognize the need for continuous development, both individually and collectively, and typically demonstrate a strong commitment to learning. With advances in technology and organizations utilizing new platforms to engage with consumers, highly effective teams must remain agile, and stay relevant. Emphasis on stay relevant because sometimes we have team members that are all different age groups, right? We have Gen Z, we have millennials, we have baby boomers, and all of those generations think very differently. So, Mary, I'd like to pose this question to you. How do you marry all of these different generations together so that they work as one cohesive unit?
Great. And because you were so right at the beginning of your comments, saying that when people think of training, they often think of the technical skills. They think of the very job relevant, hard skills. But the real success, as you point out with the young man's interview, where you heard, was the communication skills. And I think strong communication skills allow you to manage, as well as empathy and understanding, help you to manage those different generational gaps. I think it is one of those things that you manage by doing. It's when you go into teams and broader teams, it's good to be able to practice that muscle of communication and empathy and teamwork and partnership by learning about other people. Just be willing to learn and also be willing to share. And that was my comment earlier about being able to bring as much of your authentic self to your work environment. When you feel comfortable, you can do that, and you create a comfortable environment for other people to communicate about themselves. We then have the opportunity to listen and learn. Once you can demonstrate you're that type of person, it's amazing how you'll realize people will gravitate towards you, and you'll have the opportunity, you'll have the privilege to lead teams.
Yeah.
So I think it's, and that comes with practice. I can say I've learned by making mistakes at times, but acknowledging my mistakes and then using every mistake as an opportunity to grow. Using every time I don't succeed at a situation, I go back and I say, well, how could I have done that better? And I think those are the skill sets, and that's on the job, real life training and development. And that's what I encourage my other coworkers, leaders, managers to do.
Yeah.
Wonderful question, Margarita. Thank you.
So, Darlene, the question I have for you is, when you have different generations, right? And some may be versed, some were born into technology, like Gen Z was born into technology. You're pretty soon Generation Alpha, the millennials are somewhere in between, and the baby boomers, they're kind of behind. Some of them are behind, some of them are not. So one of the most important points that you have in this paragraph is to remain agile and stay relevant. So the importance of training is paramount when it comes to having all generations. Have you encountered this situation, and how did you handle that, Darlene?
Yeah, I work with different generations in the workplace, and I think the way that I handle it is always knowing where everyone's skill set is at, and that's my responsibility. It's my team to manage. I need to understand who needs help where and how they can kind of, support each other so that we can still execute well, and where are the learning opportunities and where are the mentoring opportunities where you can create some alignments that maybe won't organically happen because they're not like in a particular sitting situation. If someone's on the other side of the floor or they may not interact with another colleague that might be a perfect, set for a mentor. So really just thinking about, how can I create, those impactful relationships, and you have to force it. It's like a forcing mechanism sometimes, because if you're not intending on that outcome, it's not just organically always going to happen. People hear, oh, find your mentor at work, or like, no, sometimes as a leader, you need to see, well, I know that if I don't say I need to have folks prioritize this, they're not going to do it. And it's really essential for their development and for the team's development, because that's how we can close those gaps, or figure out if maybe we can build a position that's somehow going to support all of these folks in some way, that becomes a new creative role that takes a lot of the, there's so many different things that you can do when you really are coming together to say, here's what I can do, here's what I can't do, but really being thoughtful about it. And that's, for me, that's what development looks like, because I'm always looking at like the pipeline. Leaders have to continue to develop, because if we're not out there learning about the newest trends, then we can't go back to our teams and say, here's what's happening. Oh my gosh, if we don't get on this, we're going to be out of here.
That's right.
I mean, this is it. I mean, and it could be, it could be challenging, because you also have to look at, well, how much time do we allocate out of our day for those projects that, are just kind of like, oh, well, let's just sit around and noodle this around and let's take a look at this. Like, so how much time goes to that? What are the needs of your team that you need to fill? What are some gaps that you can quickly close? And where are the learning opportunities where you can create those mentorship components that are really essential, but they're not going to create themselves if people are on different floors and siloed in different parts of the organization. So I'm always thinking about being cohesive. How do I strategically align that? And taking a study of the organization. I've seen it written in a lot of the literature that I've looked at, where they say like, oh, leadership by walking around, see what's going on. And I think that in your surveying and talking to folks and you're understanding what's going on at all levels of the organization, you quickly see, well, gosh, if Harry had a meeting with, if they met every once in a while, maybe we wouldn't have this hiccup over here. And, okay, let's bridge that pipeline. There's just a lot. There's a lot that you can do to make an effective team, and look at those points of like, not points of like, oh, well, it's a weakness for this team and how are we going to get it? Look at it as like, hey, what are the outliers and how do we get around them quickly, but then figure out how we're going to go back and fix them, because we understand that they could be detrimental to our forward success.
Makes sense. I mean, one of the interesting things that you continue on, you talked about how strong leaders need to be in place and implement these new types of approaches when they come, or new technologies, in order to allow people to collaborate better, in order to stay competitive. So, I mean, I think that's the quality of a leader. When you talk about leadership or management by walking around, back in the old days, I think it meant you as a manager got to walk around the floor and saw what everybody's doing. But now I think it's everybody has to kind of be around us. So you learn to collaborate better, and you kind of point to those different relationships that need to happen in order to move the organization forward. And at the same time, you're thinking about what tools and technologies can I implement to make people work better. It's amazing what COVID taught us, that we could, before people say, oh, we can't work remotely, we have to be in the office every day to collaborate. Now we have different tools. And now when you come into the office, now you have together, you use that time more productively to really collaborate and get to know each other, as opposed to focusing on the technical aspects of the job. So the way we work has changed dramatically over the last 5 years. And I don't see that trend abating. I see it becoming, innovation is here to stay. And I think that's a lot of what you share in the middle section of your paper. And the ability for leaders to support that innovation and to drive that innovation is critical to creating winning teams. So I like the way you kind of bridge that middle part of the paper, and it made a lot of sense to me.
So I was reading I shouldn't say reading, I was hearing Bloomberg Radio, and they were comparing technology companies as opposed to established companies like JP Morgan. So JP Morgan wants all their employees to come back to the office 9 to 5, no virtual. And then you have the technology companies that are so used to working remotely that they can't even see having their employees come back in person. So this is definitely generational. So as much as established companies, they want to keep up with the trends, but by the same token, they still want to maintain that personal touch of seeing each other face to face. And I believe that there's a place for both, right? So for meetings that, let's say, could be settled quickly, Zoom works fine. But for meetings that need to be face to face, because there's certain situations that you run into as an entrepreneur, or even if you work for a company, that can only be discussed in person, then it applies to that as well, right? So I think that both platforms are necessary and important, but of course, most companies are going virtual because they save so much money,
Yeah.
right? They say on insurance and so on, but I think that there's something lost there as well. If it goes to too much technology, I think there's the personal touch that is lost. So I think there has to be a balance within the two. Would you agree, Darlene?
Yeah, there definitely has to be a balance from the two. And the one thing I could say is I really lean a lot more on the virtual work. And I feel like it's so much more efficient with some of the meetings that I have to run. And I think about, wow, I didn't have to travel there. I saved some time. I didn't have to like worry about like sitting in traffic, being late, running upstairs, checking in, like doing all the things that you traditionally would do to get one meeting. And then you have all this paper all around you and the copier is going off. Like I think about this, I'm like, wow, we're so much more efficient now. We're like, okay, put your screen share on, drop it in the chat, download it. It's like when I think about those pieces, I'm like, this is wonderful. How did I run business without this? It's just like, how did I run business without this? And but at the same time, I'm also thinking to myself, when I do make the trip out and I have to go visit colleagues for those in person, the energy. So Margarita, I completely agree. Like that energy, the essence of just we are human and we need to sort of be around each other. It's like that energy that you exuberate is, there's nothing that can compare to that. But in looking at the future of work, I think the good balance is going to be making sure that we can be efficient with using technology to help us with our day-to-day meetings and things that we have to do. And then just making sure that we're having a balance of those in-person events to still keep the team spirit, everybody in cohesive look, and keeping their energy sort of active because you need to have that. It's important.
Yes,
Can
yes.
I build on that? I love the point where you said about balance, but I also think you need to be very intentional around the ground rules of how you implement both. So like on days when I know I have a lot of meetings and I know I won't have the ability or energy to spend as much time with the team, those are the days I make sure I'm staying at home. And one of the rules I've established is that we have one core day. Usually this is the day where hopefully we have the least amount of meetings, and that's the day we centrally all come in to the team for collaboration purposes. And then on the other days that people come in, I want to make sure that don't come in on days when other folks are not coming. So speak in advance. Say, hey, I'm coming on these days to make sure that no one is there by them. Because nothing's worse than having someone come into the office and realize, where's the rest of my team? I mean, I have everybody else working around me, but people who I can benefit, who I can communicate with, who I'm going to spend my lunch time with, talk about our families with, they're not next to me. And I don't find that to be as productive. So I think setting ground rules and being intentional and purposeful around segregating your time when you're not going to be in the office, and then especially intentional when you're in the office together, and using that moment as an opportunity to build on the energy and enthusiasm and motivation of the team. I think that's being more purposeful with everyone's time, and I think will lead to better outcomes for the team.
So the next section I absolutely love, and it has to do with servant leadership. And Darlene, you break this into 3 sections: culture, blaze the trail, which I love, and empathy. So we're going to go first with creating a company culture. So you're right, a culture of talent development requires resources and leaders who prioritize understanding and addressing the needs of their team members. It also requires leaders to continuously develop their own skills and approaches. So in other words, it puts the onus on the manager or whoever is the head to look at themselves first, as you mentioned in the beginning, before they're able to lead. So, Darlene, I'd like you to expand on that as far as servant leadership with regard to creating a company culture that adds value for the employees and in turn themselves.
You know what? One thing I could say that I think is important because people get really busy and they feel like, oh my goodness, this leadership development opportunity came up. I shouldn't really go to it. I have a huge work pile I got to get to. I'll go to the next one. I'll go next time. I'll do the next one. I'm not really sure I like that topic. And I think about that and, it's a missed opportunity. It is an absolute missed opportunity. And for every time that an employee does that, they're costing the organization so much more money. You might as well go to class, get a new mindset about something, a new, perspective, learn something, because every time you attend a workshop or something being offered, you're going to take something away that's going to be something that's going to benefit you. And I think that there's a stigma around, well, if I'm not, if I prioritize that and my boss is looking for me because it's my lunchtime, he doesn't want me going to that, during the day because I have this going on and my projects are due. And then you sit with their leaders, and the leaders actually are saying, why isn't this person taking these opportunities? We're offering it to them. It's there for you. We're giving you a lunch and learn. We want you to go to these things. Don't worry. That pile is still going to be here when you get back. And, we're going to add to it too, by the
It's gonna
way.
come back bigger.
Like, I think it's almost like you have to give these employees a sense where they feel like it's okay, because I think they're so overworked. They have a lot going on and they feel like taking time to have leadership development is something that is like not a need that they need to fill. Like they don't prioritize it. And I think that's important. And I think that's a culture of leadership and development, and having the leader themselves. One of the things I do, which I think is fun, because I like to be someone who doesn't just, say it and not do it. So I do this thing called like a share out. And I love to be like, okay, well, let's just share out. And, this usually happens around like the end of the year. Like, when you're in that new year's, like, what are your, like, you do this like share out. Well, what are you going to work on? What is something that and it could be anything, like, because it doesn't necessarily have to be like, running a CRM platform. Like, it could just be like, anything they have going on, whatever they have passion for, and you commit to that. And I recently say I'm gonna learn all about like digital marketing. I'm gonna learn all about, I'm gonna take a couple of Coursera courses. I'm gonna learn, and I'm gonna commit to that. And we do a share out, like, what did you do this year that you didn't do, like what did you do this year that you can add some value, what that added value, and what was your takeaway? And we value that so much, because we're becoming, not that we're becoming experts by any means in any of these things that we're taking little courses in, but we're just keeping like that noodle alive. Like, you're just like, what's trending, what's going on, because you're seeing it, you're becoming familiar with it, so that if it does gravitate to be the next biggest thing, you're not like, oh, what is that? You've had some exposure to it, you understand what some of the mechanisms are, the terminology. And so when big things happen and these big shifts come in business, it's not going to be such a huge impact to your org. Your employees are already going to kind of like, oh yeah, we know that, we've seen that, we've done that, and that's what you want. So, and that's simple as just having lunch and learns, just maybe a few times a year.
But to the point you raised earlier about leader, it has to come from the leadership. So leadership sets the tone, the temperature for the culture. So even if you have a broad organization, I mean, the central CEO may set the vision, but you set the direction and tone for your specific group or your area. So it's critical that in those instances, you make sure that folks, hey, I'm going to the lunch and learn, you should join me in going as well, because it's important for our team and our team's culture that we create and maintain a learning environment. And that goes to the earlier point that was raised about leading by example. So you're right, the leader might be saying it, but people may not be following it. And in those cases where leadership needs to then demonstrate by doing, and also by walking around and making sure others are doing. So critical parts of team building and culture.
So this past Tuesday, this has been an interesting week. So this past Tuesday, Wade Younger, who is an AI expert, contacted me. We've been talking on LinkedIn all the time about AI. And he said, Margarita, let's get together on Zoom and let's talk about AI. So I said, yeah, right now. So then I asked him this question. I said, how is AI affecting people in your team by generation? And he said, it's not. And I said, how can you tell me that it's not? He said, well, because I make sure that I provide them with the tools they need so that they're up to date with what's happening with AI. He said there's a lot of free tools out there, videos, and you can be up to date with it within 3-4 months, he said. And this is how I keep my team constantly updated with AI. He said it's here to stay, it's going to happen in every facet of our life. And I set the tone for my team to keep them up to date. So that's why when we go to our next one, which is Blaze the Trail, it reminded me of Wade right away because he's setting the trail for his team so that they could be constantly up to date, and he creates dynamic teams as a result. So Mario, I'd like to ask you, how do you blaze the trail for your team?
I mean, I think the example you gave about, and you gave a technology example of how, or a technical example of how Wade in that instance blazed the trail. And the way I think about it is because even though I like folks to focus on the technicals of our job in banking, I also want them to be blazing a trail as it relates to building relationships across the organization and with each other. So it comes down to some of those things we talked about earlier, which was empathy, learning how to collaborate, learning how to be good partners, or reflecting the type of person you want to be and projecting that so you can and attract people just like you or create teams just like you, so which are again collaborative and team. So it's creating that type of culture where people can be successful. So it's again, I think that takes practice, learning from your mistakes and environment, learning about other people, and learning how to be a good communicator, how to be purposeful with your words and supportive. So I think I try to blaze the trail not from just a technical perspective, but because I want everybody to be technically sound and strong, but I just want to have a good team. I want to have people who are just I want to be around and we spend so much time together. So creating that culture where people can bring that to the environment is important. So that's how I blaze the trail.
Darlene?
I love that. I love that. And blaze the trail. The one thing I have to remind leaders is they give you a title, you're holding the responsibility for a reason, and you can't ask your team members, the employees that work for you, you can't ask them to get out there and run a mission for you. I look at it as, I have to clear as many obstacles out of the way as possible so that they can actually get where they need to go because they got faster legs than me and they're gonna get quickly. And I'm like, and that's kind of like my thought behind it. Like, yeah, I have all of the years of experience. I've been through so many different, business practices and case studies and so many different research pieces. So the areas of expertise, yes, the knowledge is all there. I can guide them the right way, but I also need to make sure that because I'm that force of knowledge, that's the onus is on me to make sure that I'm ahead of them. So it's almost like they're on the trail, but I have to be ahead of them, making sure that I'm taking care of whatever might be in their way before they get to it that could become like a traffic jam. So I look at my role in a sense as like, yeah, I'm watching where everything's happening through all the different projects that we're running and all the different leaders that are running them. But I'm also, a few weeks, a couple of months ahead of them in terms of I know what's happening next. And I'm almost like breaking down any kind of barriers or things that are going to come in the way before they even get to them. I don't want them to have those obstacles. And then we'll come and talk about them. I'll, say, hey, I checked in with this one. I did that. Yeah, I want to make sure they know, like I am blazing the way because they might not have those key relationships. They might be a little bit newer to navigating key relationships. They may not be as organized and efficient with their time management to execute as quickly as we'd like them to. So the onus is on me as a leader to make sure that I'm leading that track. And so it's getting all the obstacles out of the way, but then guiding them out of the way so that now next project, next go around, they're stronger, they're faster. That's efficiency. That's blazing the trail.
And I think the ultimate thing that you wrote in the bottom of the article, that's when trust continues to grow. Trust continues to grow. That's a beautiful thing to end the article with, because it's really about trust, isn't it? When forming great teams, when you've done all these great things that you've identified, including communication, you set strong leadership, you give them the room to grow. That's when trust begins. And when you can have trust across the team, that's where team commitment flourishes. I could point to situations in my career where I didn't have faith that my manager had my best interests at heart. They had other things that were prioritized, and those situations, I was clearly not going to be feeling that I could be successful. So I do focus on building the trust within the team based on some of the things you've identified. That's why I enjoyed the article. I was able to identify things where I want to aspire to be and to continue to be. So thank you. You're on mute, Margarita.
Okay.
I could feel the power of what you were saying too.
So this is the last section of this article, and I would venture to say that it is my favorite, and it has to do with empathy. So Darlene, you read in this article, in this section, a leader's role is essential as they act as a mirror that guides organizational behavior. Above all, they need to be empathetic, a quality that comes naturally to servant leaders. Empathy helps people feel accepted, respected, and builds trust. It all starts with the leader. And I can honestly say that empathy is lacking in our time right now. Empathy is lacking and is very much needed. And I believe it's because people are leading with their mind as opposed to their heart. I feel that leadership begins at the heart first and then to the mind later. I call that emotional diversity, when you're leading from the heart. And then, of course, you use those emotions to lead with the mind. So, Darlene, I'd like you to touch base on that. How do you lead with empathy, and what is the value to you personally?
Yeah, leading with empathy is something I really didn't think about. Like, I didn't really think about the essence of it until probably about midway through like my leadership, like in growing. It wasn't, I just knew, at first I was like learning, well, how do you manage people? What, like, it's like basic, like you're just learning all. And then you get to this point where it's like, wow, it's not about getting the job done and managing a project. It's about making sure that you're helping people feel good, feel valued, that they are you're going to retain this talent, that you're going to nurture them, that they're going to take and elevate themselves, your organization. How do you do that? And you do that because you care about them. You do that because you care about their needs. And every time, so I started to do like a reflection process, and I started thinking about myself and the things that I valued as I was climbing in my leadership journey and in my career journey. And every time leaders were there to support me and were empathetic with whatever I was going through, whatever situation, because we all have, things that were going on in our lives. I've been in business for over 30 something years. So of course things come up, and as you're thinking about things, I reflect back on those leaders who were always there to, just support me and understand what I was going through and provide support and encouragement, not, lead me to a direction where, I fall. And that's where the trust comes in, because when you know that your leader sort of has your back and has good intentions for you, you know that they're gonna be in pain if they see you in pain. It's like I look at that like I want to make sure I'm taking care of my people. That's important to me, and what they care about has to become important to me. So at first I looked at leadership as like, ooh, I'm gonna have like a fancy job. I'm gonna have a fancy office. I'm gonna have like people that report to me. I'm gonna have, like, and then I started realizing like, wow, that is totally not what leadership is. It's about how are you, helping these people around you grow. You are the area expert. You have to give them answers. You have to you have so much responsibility, but the way that you act, behave, the things that you do in your practice are going to have such an effect on them. And this is why empathy becomes something that you're learning it later on because you're doing the basics, but that should be up. It should just be upfront. Like, let's just skip ahead to the lesson plan, respect people, treat people right, and just help them, because that's what leadership is. And you got to care about those people. You got to care about everyone around you. And if you can't care, then you can't lead.
That's right.
Wow, those are powerful closing words. I don't even think I need to say anything else after that. Drop the mic and let's finish it. Let's wrap up tonight. So thank you, Darlene, for the opportunity to review, spend time with, really enjoy your article. Thank you for putting together this compelling research. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to discuss it here on tonight's program. And I also want to thank our audience for joining us here tonight. So, well, I also want you to remember, everyone, please like us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn, and you'll have the opportunity to see additional great articles written by some of our experts here at Voyage Consulting. So please take the time to review our information, and also please subscribe to our YouTube channel and look out for some of the great future programming that we will continue to do. I'd like to hand it to Margarita to close out our program tonight.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Darlene. We know that the information we shared with you will add value to you as an individual, a solopreneur, or an entrepreneur. It will soon be available for purchase with all research materials very soon. Join us next week as we continue to provide content that will have you leading winning teams. Good night, everybody.